Melo yayo igmaje dagan roro. Juru ko jela ang utaran belok ya katawat.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the welcome and for the introduction. Dr. Zonia Zarate, President of SACNAS, Dr. John Winnett, Executive Director, distinguished members of the Board of Directors of SACNAS, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I have just greeted you in the usual way in my language, Kajin Majal, or the Marshallese language. And I have just said, you are all rainbows. Like aloha is for Hawaii, Yagwe is the Marshallese greeting. Literally, it means you are a rainbow. The rainbow is a long-standing symbol of hope and recovery, especially after the storm. For us, living on small strips of land in a large expanse of ocean barely higher than the high tide, the rainbow can be the most beautiful thing in the world. And our greeting to one another says, you are beautiful. There is hope. We will recover, especially after this storm. My story today is based on what I often see as a potential fault line in my understanding of modern science. On one hand, I am a Marshallese woman, grounded in Manidin Majal, or my culture, and Kajin Majal, my language. On the other hand, I am a graduate of the academy, the modern academy where I learned to hone in my English and research skills as I wrote for the highest of academic awards, a doctoral degree, as part of the education system we inherited post-1946. The fault line, as I often experience it, is the place where traditional or cultural knowledge and modern science meet. I am not a scientist or an expert who studies or works in one of the sciences, like a nuclear or a forensic scientist. Yet, here I am at the SACNAS 2019 conference, delivering this keynote address. Reflecting on that thought, it is perhaps not such an anomaly that I stand before you today at this STEM-based gathering, because we Marshallese intimately understand the systematic study of the physical world. We are also the only country in the world where the impacts of both the climate crisis and the US nuclear weapon testing program are intersecting to further threaten our way of life. All of my life, I have identified as Marshallese as part of the Remajal system where behavior is culturally prescribed through a structure or framework of beliefs passed down from one generation to the next as part of our oral culture. While some of this information has been written down or recorded in various multimedia formats, much is still done mainly through storytelling or pewenado, as we call it. We have informed ourselves over time based on our systematic ways of understanding natural and not so natural phenomena. Marshall Islands, known to us as Island Keynote, comprises of 29 low-lying coral atolls and 5 solitary low coral islands no more than a few feet above the sea level. Our atolls and islands total 70 square miles in land area surrounded by 750,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean. A total of 1,225 individual islands and islets make up the relic or Radak or sunrise chain in the east and the relic or sunset chain in the west. The atolls built over millions of years by living coral organisms, are now threatened by rise in sea level, temperatures, and acidifications. We are located in the central Western Pacific, only 4 hours away by plane from Honolulu. Our marine environment is extremely rich in productivity, diversity, and complexity. We have a strong dependence on our natural resources and biodiversity, not only for food and income, but our relationship with these islands form the basis of our culture and society. Land is livelihood, and for us as Marshallese, it is simply and overwhelmingly about survival. One of our conservationists 4 years ago said, and I quote, "I don't think my grandchildren will be able to sail. How will your children know how to make guiro or preserve breadfruit if we're migrating to the United States or even to other places around the world? How can our children learn how to sail with the stars or fish or even weave mats? The language will be there, but language itself doesn't come with culture. Money or tradition doesn't come with speaking the language only. You have to learn ways to survive, learn how to sail with the stars, weave mats, make food, live in the harshest conditions that the world can give you. Land and subsistence are the cornerstones of Marshallese culture. To lose the land is to lose the basis of social order, the traditional power structure, and the life-giving provisions for sustenance. Our value systems, based primarily on respect and reciprocity at the different levels of the traditional hierarchy, would be non-existent without our land. Our identities are tied to our land, so much so that the Marshall Island government owns less than 1% of land. We are accomplished seafarers, navigators, and fishermen. The many fishing methods devised and used demonstrate a deep understanding of sea life, ranging from the simple hook and line to nets, traps, spears, clubs, rope, and coconut fronds. Some methods were used only for specific types of fish in specific areas of seasons. Some methods involved the participation of many people, and some were practiced by the individual. Many traditional fishing practices remain in use today, but many are being lost along with the in-depth understanding of the sea and its creatures. Moreover, fish and other marine creatures remain important subsistence food, the catching and sharing of which revive culture and community. We have over thousands of years lived in harmony with our large ocean environments. Today, I share with you all two continuing and momentous experiences in my encounters with the world of modern science, using the definition I have shared before. Both experiences are part of the historical fabric of the Marshall Islands. The first, more commonly known as climate change, has, in my lifetime, considerably altered our terrestrial and marine environments. The second centers on a US scientific experiment in 1954, codenamed Castle Bravo. Climate change is a grim reality for the Republic of the Marshall Islands. The clock is ticking for the critically vulnerable countries among us. We share a similar fate to other low-lying island states like Kiribati, Tuvalu, and the Maldives. Among these easily overlooked countries with small, susceptible populations, we are the definition of the popular expression, sink or swim. Our children and grandchildren from very early ages continue to play in our front and backyards, which are usually marine backgrounds or playgrounds, not terrestrial. As I watch them play, many thoughts cross my mind. I wonder whether they know about the plants and creatures of the sea, about our relationships with our natural environment as I knew them growing up. Our rationale for using or not using certain plants for medicinal purposes, or for postnatal bathing practices for women who had just given birth to help the healing process. These knowledge are a result of our own scientific system based on observation, experience, and experimentation over thousands of years. More recently, we are testaments of the scientific process, human experiments, guinea pigs used to test the effects of the radiation between 1946 and 1958. The biggest of the 67 nuclear bombs tested in our islands as part of the secret Project 4.1 was detonated on Bikini Atoll on March 1st, 1954. In preparation for the test, the people of Bikini Atoll were moved in 1946 to other atolls and islands in the RMI, where they remain today. The Castle Bravo explosion in 1954, which was equivalent to dropping 1.6 Hiroshima bombs daily for 12 years. And I repeat that, equivalent to dropping 1.6 Hiroshima bombs for 12 years, vaporized entire islands and left a huge crater a mile wide. 100 miles away on Rongelap Atoll, people saw a bright flash and radioactive ash they called snow rained down on them, immediately causing vomiting, headaches, and stomach discomfort. We are still trying to work out exactly what effects these blasts had on our land, our people, our lagoons and oceans, our plants, our fish, our everything. The US Cold War legacy rests inside the dome or the tomb, as the locals call it, on ruined island in Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands. The bulky legacy of years of US nuclear testing, constructed in 1979, stores around 111,000 cubic yards of collected radioactive waste left over from 12 years of nuclear tests conducted in the Marshall Islands. According to a 2013 report by the US Department of Energy, soil around the dome is already more contaminated than its contents, which is probably true, given the dumping of radioactive materials into the lagoon. The dome is cracked in certain sections, and as sea level rises, radioactive waste is starting to leach out of the crater into the ocean. The intersection between the nuclear legacy and climate change speaks volumes about our vulnerability, despite our attempts to remain resilient following in the footsteps of our ancestors. Even as scientists hypothesize, tested, and analyze, and even as our cultural heritage continues to be adversely threatened by accelerated soil erosion, sea level rise, declining fish populations, and coral bleaching, we are applying our traditional knowledge in much the same way that modern science operates. We are reinterpreting vulnerability and adaptability in terms of Marshallese traditional knowledge within the Raymond process, what we call a looking ahead process. With the Raymond, our 8-step conservation area management planning framework, we are assisting atoll communities in the Marshall Islands to think globally and act locally. Raymond employs community-based tools and approaches to articulate local objectives that translate to national, regional, and international goals. In 2004, parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity committed to have effectively conserved at least 10% of marine and coastal regions globally by 2010. In Micronesia, we went further. We have pledged to effectively conserve 30% of nearshore marine and 20% of terrestrial resources. In this endeavor, our strength lies directly in the partnerships we make. We continue to combine local knowledge in recognition of our own practices to protect biodiversity with the scientific expertise of international partners. But even as we rise to the challenges of the pledges we have made, including our commitments to the Paris Agreement, we fear that nature threatens to sink us. We fear that our fellow men and women will not adjust their destructive behaviors in a timely fashion. We fear that the world will not notice if we sink. The time has come for the global community to seek viable and effective solutions to the climate crisis, and to do so with unrestrained speed. It is my hope that the global community can summon the leadership needed to urgently increase its ambition to get us on a pathway consistent with the Paris Agreement and to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. At the last Pacific Island Forum meeting in Tuvalu in August, I joined fellow Pacific Island Forum leaders in affirming that the climate crisis remains the single greatest threat to our regional security. Last month, our parliament, the Nadijale, approved a resolution declaring a national climate crisis, highlighting the special circumstances we face as a low-lying coral atoll nation. We are also developing a landmark national adaptation plan, which we call National Survival Plan, to shore up our own future, including possibly raising some of our islands. That is why I'm so committed to sharing with as many stakeholders as possible, especially female champions, leaders of colors, and diverse STEM students and professionals with a shared desire to protect our common vital resources. So, in summary, where on the continuum of scientific research are my reflections of our Marshallese history located? In a sentence, in our responsibility as researchers in science. There are differences in terms of expectations of research processes in indigenous research as opposed to other academic research. Mainstream and indigenous viewpoints will collide at times, but both perspectives need to understand the value of an ethical framework. Moreover, if an ethical framework for indigenous research is constructed for everyone to use, the cultural mandate must be robust for it to be considered legitimate. This is the case even if resources are provided from national agencies. Our challenge as indigenous researchers in science is to continue interrogating the limits of existing methodologies because we need to create new ones that will be inclusive of our traditional frameworks and ethos. Our lands and territories are at the core of our existence. We are the land, and the land is us. We have a distinct spiritual and material relationship with our lands and territories, and they are inextricably linked to our survival. Once our lands and territories are devastated, we threaten the continuity of our traditional culture and our existence as indigenous people. Many of us share the belief that we walk to the future in the footprints of our ancestors. This is a quote from Kimberley Declaration 2002. If the footprints are destroyed, then we have no future. We as Marshallese have a holistic view of our world as part of our indigenous culture. This view includes nature's provision of clean water and access to traditional food and herbs within a prescribed hierarchical social organization of authority in relation to resources. The scientific result of any research must recognize this cultural perspective. Otherwise, it will be purely based upon a Western scientific view of indigenous people, and our traditional knowledge and will not be representative of our story. All interventions and intrusions in modern Marshallese society, like the atomic bomb test and the effects of climate change as we live them, are points on the Marshallese storyline that begin with our first ancestors. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said in a recent address at the 74th session of the UN General Assembly, and I quote, "There is no changing a nation's history, but we can choose how it defines us," unquote. As modern-day Marshallese, we are largely Christians, and we are constantly reminded that God gave Noah the sign of the rainbow, that he would never flood the world again. Despite our faith, we experience our world differently. We are proud of our advocacy efforts around the climate crisis threatening our very existence. Institutes such as those convened by SACNAS prepare the youth of today to assume the responsibilities and leadership potential of our nations, especially in light of the impacts we face due to climate change and ongoing adverse medical conditions due to radioactive exposure. Similarly, we appreciate the role of the College of the Marshall Islands and the University of South Pacific in providing human resource development in critical areas. We continue to develop initiatives to mitigate the critical challenges facing us in relation to climate change, even as the king tides, on one hand, inundates our homes and droughts at other times of the year threaten crucial food and water supplies. Adapting to the new, more frequent droughts, we have built water catchments to enable safe water supply of water for at least 4 months in each of our island communities. We have built seawalls to safeguard our homes, graveyards, and other infrastructures. If we don't do it, who will? Resources being redirected to combat the impacts of climate change are very much needed in other critical and fundamental areas of education and health. Combining the strength of our traditional knowledge with modern scientific expertise, our children will be a force to be reckoned with. Our resilient island warriors will champion the protection of our land and seas and openly admonish any endeavor to do otherwise. They will channel the advocating, outspoken spirits of our role models, such as Dwight Heine, Tony the Broom, or Darlene K. Johnson. And they will devise community-specific strategies to move forward as a small island, large ocean nation, utilizing traditional local knowledge in the face of a changing climate. They will tell you that you are a rainbow. You are beautiful, and they will swim because we have done so for thousands of years. Thank you very much.
Pokoknya remelo iya, maje dagan roro.